The creek had long since dried up, but Alice May still visited it each morning. She stood barefoot on the cracked earth, a tin cup of yesterday's water in her hand, watching dust stir in the wind like faint memories. Her auburn hair, unpinned and tangled, lifted with the breeze. A few leaves clung to the low cottonwoods along the bank, their gold edges fluttering like they didn't know if they should stay or go. The world felt paused there, in the hush of early light. And in that pause, Alice let herself breathe. She didn't cry. She hadn't in years. Behind her, past the ridge, the town of Elmswood stirred awake, roosters, wagon wheels, men cursing stiff joints. She drank slowly from the tin, cold metal stinging chapped lips, and when she turned toward home, her gait was steady, unhurried, like she knew the walk back would steal something from her she hadn't quite grown back yet. Mabel Quinn watched her from the porch of the mercantile. The old midwife squinted into the morning glare, apron smudged with flour, her hand still as bread dough rested. She leaned into the younger woman beside her and said softly, "Still goes out there, every dawn." The other woman nodded. "Folks say she talks to ghosts." "No," Mabel murmured. "She's just trying to remember what being free used to feel like." Alice passed them without looking up, though she'd heard. She always did. Her steps slowed just enough to catch their hush, then carried her on. She didn't wear shoes today. Eli had thrown them across the yard last night, and she hadn't bothered to fetch them. Her soles were tough, from walking on cold boards and sharper words. The house sat at the edge of town, a sagging two-room thing with lopsided steps and a door that scraped when it opened. She climbed them slowly, hand on the rail, fingers brushing against the flaking paint like she could memorize the cracks before they changed again. Inside, Eli was already at the table, sipping coffee that had turned black and bitter on the stove. He didn't look up when she entered. "You were gone a while. I went to the creek." Nothing there but dust. She folded her shawl over a nail by the door and moved to the stove, poured what was left of the coffee into a chipped cup, more grounds than liquid, and sat across from him. "Don't like your hair down like that," he said without lifting his gaze. "Looks wild, like your skin for attention." "It's morning," she said quietly. "I haven't pinned it yet." He looked up then. His eyes were bleary from last night's whiskey, but sharp underneath. "You talking back?" "No. You forget who you belong to." "No." The cup shook slightly in her hand, so she set it down. He leaned forward, bracing on his elbows, and the table creaked. "I've been thinking," he said. "Maybe it's time we fix how folks look at you. All this hair making, you think you're better than you are." Her throat tightened, but her face remained still. She trained herself long ago to wear silence like a second skin. "You cut a horse's mane when it starts throwing its head," he went on. "Reminds it who's holding the reins." She rose from the table, slow and calm. "I'll pin it back." He reached out, grabbing her wrist. "No, I said cut." His voice was even, almost kind. That was worse than shouting. The kindness meant it was real, settled. "I'll go fetch the shears," he said, letting go. "We'll do it on the porch, so folks see." She stood unmoving for a moment, then turned and walked to the hearth. Beneath the wood bin was a loose board. She knelt, pulling it free, and tucked her hair beneath the shawl, still hanging on the wall. Her hand brushed something cool metal. Scissors. She had placed them there months ago, not sure why. Now they felt like a choice. Behind her, Eli rummaged in the drawer. "I'll do it," she said without turning. "What?" "I'll cut it myself." He paused, then chuckled. "Ain't the same, but fine." On the porch, they stepped out into the pale morning light. A few town eyes turned from windows and doorways. Mabel's silhouette stiffened in the distance. Alice unfolded the scissors with care, holding them like she might a baby bird, something fragile, something that could cut you all the same. She drew her hair over her shoulder, thick and waving down to her ribs. The wind stirred it slightly. It looked soft even now. She raised the blades and froze, because across the dirt road, standing just beyond the split-rail fence that bordered the prairie edge, a figure stood still as a tree, watching. An Apache, not dressed for war. He wore a plain buckskin shirt, worn moccasins, and a red band around his braided hair. His eyes were dark and quiet, unreadable. He didn't move, just watched. The scissors hovered. Eli noticed then. He followed her gaze and snarled, loud enough for the street to hear. "Don't tell me that Redskin's been watching you." Alice said nothing. "Savage thinks you're his, does he?" Still, she said nothing. The Apache didn't blink, didn't flinch. Eli stepped forward. "You got something to say, Injun?" The man didn't speak. Didn't need to. It was in the way he stood, upright, easy, like nothing about Eli was worth stepping toward. That kind of calm could slice a man open without touching him. Alice, hand still holding the scissors, slowly let her arm fall to her side. The moment stretched, pulled thin by breath and heat, and something older than language. "I'll keep my hair," she said softly. Eli looked at her like he might strike her, but he didn't. Not with that figure watching. He turned and spat into the dirt, stormed inside, the door slamming behind him. She stayed there, wind brushing her cheeks. Her hands trembled, but she did not cry. Instead, she looked toward the fence again. The Apache nodded once, then turned and walked into the trees. She didn't know his name, but something in her had just remembered her own, and that was enough for now. The next morning broke heavy with heat, though the sun was barely up. Alice moved like water over stone, quiet and practiced, the shawl wrapped tight around her shoulders, though the air didn't ask for it. She stepped over the back step, where the wood had warped and wouldn't bear weight, gathered her empty flour sack, and walked toward town. Eli didn't stir. His snores came low and bitter from the bedroom, thick with last night's bottle, and whatever haunted dreams kept his fists twitching in sleep. She didn't wait for his permission. She just left, feet light across the yard, eyes low so no one mistook her silence for defiance. The walk was long enough for thoughts to drift, but not long enough to lose them. Each step stirred the dust in little clouds behind her. A crow flapped overhead, cutting across the pale sky, its cry a harsh warning. She passed the creek again, still dry, cracked like old skin. She didn't stop this time, just brushed her fingers once against the brittle grass, like greeting a friend too sick to speak. By the time she reached Elmswood's main road, the day had begun to swell. Mabel stood outside the store already, sweeping the porch with short, tired strokes. Her eyes lifted when she saw Alice. "Morning, child," she said, voice rough but not unkind. Alice gave a small nod. "Need flour? Come on in, then. Got fresh sacks from Santa Fe yesterday." Mabel stepped aside. "You doing all right?" "I'm fine." "That's so." Alice didn't answer. Inside, the shop smelled of dried apples and kerosene. Wooden shelves bowed under the weight of need. Mabel fetched the flour and placed it in Alice's sack, then hesitated, reached under the counter and slid in a small brown vial. "For the bruises," she said softly. Alice paused. Her lips parted like she might protest, then closed again. She took the bundle, nodded once, and left without another word. Outside, people pretended not to see her. Their silence was sharper than speech. She passed Sheriff, Colling leaning on the post office rail, chewing a toothpick, eyes under his hat brim fixed on a spot just above her head. He didn't greet her. She didn't expect him to. It was nearly midday by the time she reached home again, her arms tired from carrying what should have felt heavier. She stepped into the kitchen. Eli sat at the table, shirtless, the fly buzzing near his plate. "You go without a skin again." "I left a note," she said. "No, don't speak for you." She placed the flour on the counter, steadying her breath. His voice was slurred with the tail end of drink, anger folded inside it like something soaked in lye. "You think that Indian's going to protect you now?" he said, voice rising. Alice froze. "I don't know what you mean." "You don't." He rose slowly, boots dragging on the floor. "You stand on the porch like some kind of princess while he watches you. You like being seen by him, don't you?" "I didn't ask him to watch." "You didn't stop him neither." He grabbed her by the wrist, the same one he bruised weeks ago. She didn't cry out, didn't pull away. She just looked at him with that quiet, flat gaze that always made him feel smaller than he was. He dragged her toward the door. "Let's give him a better look then. Let him see what belongs to me." She stumbled once, caught herself. The shears were already on the porch bench. He'd placed them there. Planned it. He shoved her forward, one hand fisting in her hair. Maybe I'll cut it right at the scalp. Let's see how much he wants you then. Alice's heart beat, so loud it drowned out the world, but her face stayed still. She looked at the trees, at the place where the prairie met the edge of the woods, at the slight ripple in the pines. Then she saw him. Same as before. Same stance. Nanton stood at the fence line, arms crossed, eyes unreadable. There was no urgency in him, just presence. Eli hadn't seen him yet. The scissors glinted in his hand, raised now, ready to slice. I'm talking to you, he growled. Maybe I'll leave it in strips. Make you look like the mongrel you act like. Alice didn't scream. She didn't fight, but she did speak. Someone's watching. Eli hesitated, blinking, turned his head, and froze. Nanton took one step forward. Eli's hand dropped. What in hell? He muttered, stepping back. He following you now. Alice didn't answer. Eli's voice cracked like glass. You think he's some savior? He won't come near if he knows what's good for him. Nanton said nothing, just kept walking, slow and steady, toward the porch. Eli backed up into the doorway, still holding the scissors, but they looked small now, weak. I ain't afraid of no savage, he hissed, though he didn't sound like he believed it. Alice moved toward the edge of the porch. Nanton stopped just beyond the bottom step. He looked at her, not Eli. His gaze didn't search for wounds or bruises. He looked at her face, at the part of her she thought no one had seen in years. He spoke, his voice low and calm. A warrior does not cut what a woman grows to feel whole. The words hung in the air, heavier than any blade. Alice blinked. She hadn't expected him to speak. She didn't know his voice would sound like water moving over smooth stone. Eli scoffed. You preaching now. Nanton looked at him then. One look, and that was all it took. Eli turned and disappeared inside. The door slammed. Alice stayed there, one hand still half lifted, empty. Nanton didn't climb the steps. He just nodded once, like he'd done his part, then turned and walked back toward the trees. She watched him go. Her breath caught somewhere between her ribs, not because she needed him, but because he hadn't tried to save her, only reminded her she could save herself. When the wind blew again, it lifted her hair gently off her shoulders, like it too remembered something sacred. She stepped back inside and slid the scissors beneath the hearthstone again. She didn't cut her hair. Not that day. Not ever again. The days that followed settled into a quiet neither peaceful nor tense, just still, like dust hanging in the air before it falls. Alice moved through them with careful grace, her hand steady over washboard and kettle, her eyes soft but guarded. Eli drank less, but only because he watched more. He was waiting, she sensed, for something he couldn't name, but feared all the same. That fear made him quieter, and quieter made him meaner. Each morning she walked to the creek. She didn't say why, and Eli didn't ask, but his gaze followed her like a rope, tugging as she stepped out the door. She never stayed long, just long enough to feel the wind move through her hair, long enough to look across the prairie and feel the edge of something vast and kind pressing near. He was always there now, not close, not near enough to frighten, just visible, a figure at the far fence line, sometimes half hidden by brush or slope. Nanton. He never approached, never called out. He let her see him. That was all. She hadn't spoken to him again since the porch, but his silence said plenty. It said, I see you. It said, you are not alone, even if you stand alone. And that, for a woman who'd been invisible so long, felt like heat after frost. Once, while hanging laundry, she looked up and found a small bundle on the porch rail. Firewood cut clean and bound in twine. Not the kind Eli chopped with ragged swings and curses, but neat pieces, chosen with care. She didn't touch them for an hour, just looked. When she finally brought them inside, she said nothing. Another morning, a sprig of wildflowers appeared at the edge of the steps, purple asters, a few faded sunflowers, and sage, tied with leather string. Eli didn't see it. She brushed it into her apron pocket before he rose. She did not smile, but her chest ached with something unfamiliar, something that might one day become joy if it ever grew large enough. In town, the whispers had shifted. Mabel gave her a look one afternoon, half worried, half curious, as Alice reached for salt. "You've been looking different," the old woman said, wrapping a parcel. "Not in the face. In the way you carry your bones." "I don't feel different," Alice answered, though it wasn't true. Some things don't need feeling. They just show up. Outside, the wind stirred Alice's hair loose from its pin. She didn't fix it. "You walking with him?" Mabel asked, almost a whisper. "No. Thinking about it." Alice paused. "He don't walk with anyone." Mabel didn't press, but her hand lingered on Alice's as she handed the parcel across the counter. "Just remember, this town's got long tongues and short hearts." Alice nodded. She was used to both. Later that week, she found herself by the creek again, the light falling slanted and warm. Nanton stood further back than usual, half shaded beneath the leaning pine. She didn't look away this time. She stepped forward. He didn't move. The space between them hummed, alive and still. She stopped 5 paces from him. "I didn't get to thank you," she said, voice soft. His head tilted. "You don't owe me thanks." "I know, but I wanted to." His eyes were dark and calm. "You stood on your own feet. That was enough." A long pause stretched between them, filled with breeze and birdsong and the low, constant hum of the world continuing. "Why do you come?" she asked. He looked past her for a moment. "Because sometimes a warrior doesn't fight with his hands. Sometimes he watches until someone remembers they are still whole." She didn't know how to answer that. It wasn't like the way men in town spoke. No boasting, no pity. Just truth. He reached into his satchel and drew out something small. A hair comb, carved from bone, smoothed and shaped with care. No decoration, just clean lines, balanced in his palm like it belonged there. He held it out to her. She didn't move. "I can't take that," she said. "It's not a gift," he said. "It's a reminder." She stepped forward, took it. It was heavier than it looked, warm from his hand. Her thumb traced the carved edge. "Why me?" she asked. He didn't blink. "Because someone should see you before you vanish." She closed her fingers around the comb. "I don't know what to do with this." "Wear your hair free," he said. "Let it remember what the wind feels like." She nodded once, then turned and walked back toward the house, not faster, not slower, but straighter. That evening, Eli sat on the porch with a bottle, eyes squinting into the dark. She passed him with the comb in her hand. He didn't notice it. "You see your red friend again?" he asked, voice slurred. "I saw the sky," she answered. "You getting clever?" She paused at the door. "No, just honest." He sneered. "You keep talking like that. Folks'll think you're better than you are." She looked at him then, really looked. Not with fear, but with something cooler. "Older. Maybe I am." He laughed, but it didn't sound certain. Inside, she lit the lamp low and brushed her hair with the comb. It didn't catch on snags. It moved like it knew her, like it was meant to. She left it unpinned as she swept the floor, as she set the water to warm. She didn't sleep that night. Not deeply, but for the first time in years, she dreamed. Not of escape, but of standing still and not being struck. Of being touched, not to harm, but to honor. And somewhere in that dream, she heard a voice, not his, not Nanton's, but her own, whispering, "I'm still here. I'm still whole. And I ain't done yet." It started with whispers, low and curling through the town like wood smoke. Alice Mae Dawson's been seen talking to an Apache. Alone. Smiling. Her hair loose like she don't belong to nobody. The women who folded laundry behind screen doors passed it between them like folded letters. The men chewed it over with their tobacco. It wasn't new to them, just sharper now. Rumor, like thirst, was never satisfied. It only deepened with time. Sheriff Colling leaned against the post outside his office, straw hat tipped back, eyes unreadable. When Mabel passed with a basket of greens, he said nothing at first. But then, "She's drawing trouble." Mabel didn't pause. Trouble finds her either way. He spat near the horse rail. A man like Eli don't take kindly to being made a fool. "She'd been made a bruise for 5 years. Ain't called you once." He looked away. That Indian steps on white land. It'll be worse than a bruise. Mabel walked on. That evening, Alice returned from the creek path with her shawl drawn close and a strand of sage tucked behind her ear. The comb was in her hair. She wore it like a quiet badge. She had not seen Nathan that day, but she'd felt him near, like the wind through tall grass, there, even when it didn't move. Eli sat on the porch, bottle in one hand, a rag clutched in the other. He didn't look at her, just tossed the rag aside and said, "Sheriff stopped by." Alice stepped inside, placed her tin cup on the counter. "What for?" He followed her in, slower now. "Said folks been talking. Said he can't ignore things if a woman starts making a spectacle." She didn't answer. He circled the table. "You making a spectacle, Alice?" "No." "You going behind my back with a man who ain't even Christian?" "No." His voice was thick with something more dangerous than anger. Humiliation. "You think I don't see the way you look out past the trees? The way you walk lighter now, like you're being lifted?" She turned to him then. "Maybe I am." His hand twitched. She didn't step back. "You don't speak to me like that," he said, low and tight. "You don't speak to me like you've got someplace to go." She lifted her chin. "Maybe I do." He struck the table. The salt tin rattled. A plate fell from the shelf and cracked on the floor. "Who do you think you are?" She bent down slowly and picked up the broken piece. "Someone you can't control anymore." That night, the silence in the house wasn't peaceful. It was thick with waiting, the kind of silence that carries weight, like the hour before a storm. Alice didn't sleep. She sat at the window, watching the trees, comb clutched in her hand like a knife made of memory. Near midnight, Eli rose. She heard the creak of his boots. The door opened. A pause. He didn't go out. He came for her. His shadow filled the room before he did. The scissors were in his hand again. "No more wild hair," he said. "No more signs to him." She rose, slow and even. "You cut my hair, and I'll never speak your name again. Not to the sheriff. Not to the preacher. Not to God." He grabbed her by the elbow hard. "You don't get to leave me shamed. You did that all by yourself." His hand came up, and then the front door opened. Nathan stood there. He didn't shout, didn't draw steel. He just filled the space with stillness, like stepping into water gone suddenly cold. Eli dropped her arm. "You got no right in here." Nathan didn't answer. "This is my home. My wife." Alice stepped back, breath tight, hand brushing Nathan's as she moved behind him. Nathan's voice was low. "A home doesn't bruise. A wife isn't owned." Eli laughed, a bitter, cracked sound. "You come to take her?" Nathan didn't blink. "I came because I heard her silence." Eli raised the scissors like they were something deadly. Nathan didn't move. His gaze alone undid the moment. Alice stepped forward, between them. "You won't touch me again," she said. "Not after tonight." "You think he'll save you?" Eli hissed. "I think I already saved myself," she whispered. Eli dropped the scissors. They clattered to the floor like something hollow. Outside, thunder rolled far off. The storm had waited long enough. Rain came before morning. Not hard at first, just a soft pattering on the roof, like the house was finally exhaling. Alice sat at the kitchen table with a blanket over her shoulders, the comb resting beside her cup. She hadn't slept. There had been too much stillness, too many unspoken things heavy in the walls. Eli hadn't come out of the bedroom since dropping the scissors, and she hadn't gone in after him. The door stayed closed, and she let it. She stared out the window, watching the dry earth turn dark and soft with each drop. It looked like a baptism. By mid-morning, the rain had thickened into steady sheets, drumming against the windows and pouring off the eaves. Still, Alice didn't move. She waited. Not for Eli. Not for Nathan. She waited for the part of herself that had been hiding for years to decide whether it trusted her enough to stay. The front door opened quietly. She didn't turn right away. The creak was soft, the way Nathan always entered, without force, without noise. Like someone who understood that a threshold wasn't just wood and hinges, but a kind of promise. He stepped inside, wet from the rain but calm, as though he'd been walking in it for miles. He said nothing at first, just stood in the doorway, watching her, the way one might look at a fire that hadn't been tended in too long. "I don't know what to do now," she said. "You already did it." Her voice broke around the edges. "He's still in there. He won't come out." She finally looked at him. "How do you know?" "Because he doesn't know how to face the woman you've become." She wanted to believe that. She wanted it to be enough. But years of silence don't disappear just because one night you found the courage to speak. "I'm still scared," she admitted. "So was I," he said. "When my people scattered. When my brother died. When the ones who promised peace took everything and gave nothing." She didn't ask what happened next. She didn't have to. "But I kept walking," he continued, "because the land didn't stop breathing, even when I did." Alice's hand moved to the comb. Her fingers curled around it. "I thought I'd have to leave," she said. "Run far. Hide. You don't need to run. You just need to step out." The door behind him creaked. Eli stood there, leaning on the frame, eyes wild and sunken. He looked like a man dragged out of a nightmare and not sure if the world outside was worse. His shirt hung loose, the color drained from his face. "You think you can just walk out?" he asked, voice cracking. "Like you didn't take everything from me?" Alice stood slowly. "I didn't take anything," she said. "You gave it away. Every time you raised your hand. Every time you turned your shame into my punishment." He staggered a step forward. "You think this savage will give you a better life? You think he won't leave you once he's bored of your quiet ways?" Nanton stepped forward, but Alice held out a hand. "Not yet. I don't need someone to give me a better life," she said. "I need a life where I'm not afraid to breathe." "You think you'll be safe in this town?" Eli sneered. "They'll turn on you. They already have." "Maybe," she said, "but I'll walk with my head high. And if they whisper, I won't bow." Eli's face twisted, like he didn't recognize her anymore, like he'd been replaced in his own story and didn't know how it had happened. "You're nothing," he hissed. "You're a woman with no one." She shook her head. "No, I'm a woman who chose herself." And then Mabel's voice came from the porch. "She's not alone." Alice turned. Mabel stood in the rain, apron soaked through, but upright, eyes fierce. Behind her, others gathered, quiet folk, but steady. A few women. A ranch hand. Sheriff calling, his jaw tight. "Not many, but enough." "You raised a hand to her one too many times," Mabel said to Eli. "And now the town sees." Eli looked at the crowd, then at Alice. The truth dawned in his expression like pain. He was no longer feared, no longer protected by the silence of others. He was alone. He looked down at the scissors in his hand. He'd picked them up again without even thinking. He dropped them. They landed in the mud outside the door with a wet, shameful thud. "I built this house," he said, almost pleading. "No," Alice said. "You built a prison. I just stopped living in it." She stepped past him. Rain soaked her shawl instantly, plastered her hair to her cheeks, but she didn't flinch. She walked down the steps, slow and steady, until she reached Mabel. "Got a place made up," Mabel said softly. "It's not much, but it's yours if you want it." Alice turned once, looking at the house, the paint peeling, the windows smudged with years of breath she hadn't exhaled. She looked at Nantan. "I don't know what comes next." "You don't have to." He extended his hand, not demanding, not rescuing, just offering. She didn't take it yet, but she walked beside him. That was enough. They passed the fence line, through the mud and the eyes and the soft falling rain, past the place where the prairie breathed and the trees began. The air smelled of earth and sage, and the storm eased like a curtain lifting. Alice stopped once, pulled a strand of her hair free, and let it fall into the wind, not as a loss, but as a goodbye. And behind her, the house stayed standing, small and sad and silent, no longer her grave. She didn't look back. Some folks say rescue comes on horseback, with fire and thunder. But the truest kind rides quiet. It watches. It waits. And when it comes, it doesn't lift you out. It walks beside you, steady as breath, until you remember how to move on your own. So if you see a woman walking through rain with her hair unbound and her eyes forward, let her pass. She's not running. She's rising.